What happens when you take a gorgeous Playmate of the Year, stick her in an island bikini that only barely covers her biggest assets, and then tell her to say a bunch of gibberish while menacing her with invisible dinosaurs? Well, you get a classic Hammer film, of course. Today we'll be looking at one of Hammer's desperate attempts to stave off decline in the early 70s by trying to recapture the magic of Raquel Welch's fur beachwear. Unfortunately, they couldn't get Raquel Welch or Ray Harryhausen, so they had to make do with the aforementioned Playboy Playmate and with a guy who trained under the inventor of Gumby. Believe it or not though, they actually made it work.
Something has gone wrong with the sun, and in the chaos, Sana of the Cliff Tribe escapes her own execution and makes her way to the Sand Tribe, where she meets the handsome Tara. Settling into a peaceful life by the ocean, Sana's brief courtship is interrupted by the arrival of the Cliff Tribe, who believe their failure to sacrifice her to their sun god is the cause of chaotic weather events and the strange celestial object forming in the night sky. For helping Sana escape, Tara is branded a traitor, and the pair must find a way to elude their tribes while the world comes apart at the seams.
Following the enormous success of 1 million years BC, Hammer Films was eager for a follow-up. To head a new production, they tapped Ida Young, who had been an associate producer on 1 million years BC. Her first order of business was acquiring a script, so she turned to the Shepperton-based new wave sci-fi novelist J.G. Ballard, who would later gain worldwide attention for his provocative novels Crash and Empire of the Sun, both of which would get their own film adaptations. Unfortunately, Ballard's treatment was rejected by the higher-ups at Hammer, who felt the tone was too satirical and silly. Young then met with Hammer veteran Val Guest, the esteemed director of The Quatermass Experiment and The Day the Earth Caught Fire, along with a catalog of other genre films like The Camp on Blood Island, Life is a Circus, and Stop Me Before I Kill. Young showed him what Hammer executive James Carreras wanted from this new picture she was working on, including a drawing of a woman in the jaws of a dinosaur. Guest admitted he had never done a movie like that before, but he agreed because he thought, quote, "it might be fun," unquote. Though J.G. Ballard retained credit in the final film for contributing the story, most of what made it to the screen was actually conceived and written by Val Guest, including the 27 words of invented caveman language spoken throughout. Thus, on a budget of £2.5 million, production was underway on When Dinosaurs Ruled the World. Oh yeah, in Britain, that's what the movie was called. It didn't get renamed to When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth until it arrived in America. The topic of today's video was voted on by my Patreon supporters. If you'd like to vote on future topics, get ad-free versions of my videos, and see the occasional bonus video, consider joining my Patreon or becoming a channel member. I'd like to give a special shout out to my $8 androids: Batty Bat Firebrand, Chuck Poor, Diane McGill Davis, Don Quixote, Giffen Chumley DDF, Harold the Hatter, Jack Blair, John Burrell, Mike O'Connor, Robert McGill, Scott Johnner, Spoats, Tracy Roth Myers, and Warren Davis. Thank you all so much for your support. Hammer's first choice to play the lead, Sana, was of course Raquel Welch, who turned it down. The role instead went to Victoria Vetri, an actress who, under the pseudonym of Angela Dorian, had had minor roles over the years in several films, including Rosemary's Baby.
I'm sorry. I thought you were Victoria Vetri, the actress.
But who was probably most famous for being Playboy's 1968 Playmate of the Year. For When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth, she sent in an audition tape, made by Francis Ford Coppola of all people, that was essentially just her running up and down a parking lot in a bikini. One problem she encountered upon getting the role, though, was her iconic red hair. You see, the story of when dinosaurs ruled the Earth, like prehistoric women before it, has an unusual fixation on the primitive socio-racial tension between blondes and brunettes. So therefore, Sana's blonde hair is a critical plot point. However, Vetri refused to change her hair color for the film, so instead they had to cover it up with a less than convincing blonde wig. Opposite Vetri in the role of Tara is the playwright/novelist Robin Hawden, whose biggest claim to fame as an actor was that he was briefly in the running to replace Sean Connery as James Bond. Other notable actors include Patrick Allen as both Kingser and the narrator, Imogen Hassel as the jealous Ayak, and Red Leader himself, Drew Henley, as Kaku. The biggest star of the film, though, wasn't an actor, but rather the stop-motion animation dinosaurs of Jim Danforth. Since Ray Harryhausen was busy with future review topic The Valley of Gwangi, Hammer, with grand promises of creative freedom, lured in Danforth, who had already earned fame in the effects industry for his work under George Pal on The Time Machine and Seven Faces of Dr. Lao. Alas, Hammer's promises proved hollow, according to Danforth, who wasn't involved in critical planning stages and who wound up getting into several arguments over what he could and could not do, resulting in the removal of several key effects scenes from the script. Nevertheless, Danforth, who was only contracted for a year, agreed to work for an additional 5 months to complete the film, despite very tight budget restrictions. Ultimately, his efforts paid off because When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth was nominated for an Academy Award the following year, marking the one and only time a Hammer film received such an honor. Principal photography began in mid-October 1968. The interior sets were all done at Shepperton Studios, while the location shooting was done entirely in the Canary Islands, specifically Grand Canary Island and Fuerteventura. In the UK, the film snuck by the film censors with surprisingly little pushback, though a couple of mild instances of nudity had to be removed for America. Thankfully, those scenes were put back in for American home video in 2017. When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth released in October 1970 in the UK and in February 1971 in the US. Exact box office figures are tricky to get my hands on, but the movie made a bountiful £51,000 in only its first month in Britain, and ultimately around $1.25 million by the end of its initial run in America. It also got really good reviews, which praised the visuals, specifically the 1-2 combo of Danforth's effects and Victoria Vetri's skimpy bikini, and guests directing. It doesn't quite have the lasting legacy of 1 million years BC, but When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth is nevertheless a beloved film in the Hammer filmography, more fondly remembered than a lot of the studio's other films of the time, including 1971's Creatures the World Forgot. As for me, as much as I enjoy watching scantily clad women wrestle on the beach, this movie is neither sober enough to be taken seriously, nor silly enough to be a guilty pleasure. With his more character-driven sensibilities, Val Guest was always an odd choice to direct a caveman and dinosaur movie, but I will give him credit for getting decent performances from half-naked actors forced to endlessly parrot the same 20 or so nonsense words. There are some genuinely moving moments, like the funeral scene, that rival the heights of 1 million years BC, and I do have at least one hot take in that I think Victoria Vetri is a moderately better actress than Raquel Welch. Not that she was primarily hired for her thespian talents. Where the movie really shines, though, is in Jim Danforth's stop-motion animation, made all the more remarkable considering his lack of creative input. It's not hard to see why he earned Hammer its sole Oscar nomination. You'll have to tell me in the comments if Danforth's animation here is better or worse than Ray Harryhausen's work on 1 million years BC, because I'll admit to being a little conflicted. That said, there are fewer effects scenes in When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth than there should be. It's obvious a lot of sequences were scrapped prior to filming, replaced with a lot of padded out scenes like the excruciatingly long climactic chase, which incidentally ends with the story in exactly the same place it was half an hour before, with Tara getting rescued from execution by sheer plot contrivance. From a thematic standpoint, I get what Guest was going for. This is a tale about humanity conquering elemental nature, and about love overcoming religious zealotry. The movie has motifs of wind, water, and fire, causing devastation that is blamed on the Cliff Tribe's inability to sacrifice Sana. What appears to be a piece of the almighty sun, which both tribes worship, has splintered off and is illuminating the night sky. They naturally interpret this as their god's wrath. It turns out, though, to be the moon, literally being created, which raises all kinds of scientific questions that are best left unasked in a movie where cavemen live alongside dinosaurs. So, even as his own tribe wants to track Sana down and kill her to appease the sun, Tara, out of love, refuses to believe that bad things can be blamed on a single person. That's why he defies the tribal chieftains, even as they all seem doomed to perish in a brutal tidal wave. Those who continue to believe they are being punished ultimately die, while those who reject homicidal superstition in favor of compassion are allowed to live on in a more enlightened world. So even though the movie has its flaws, I wouldn't personally count it among Hammer's best, it nevertheless has a lot to say and a lot to look at. Whether it counts as science fiction or not is entirely up to you, but in my eyes, this movie continues to be a sci-fi classic. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. What's your favorite caveman and dinosaur movie? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons. Thank you for watching, and until next time, when the world will declare in one voice that we will not vanish without a fight, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love. As long as you're not hurting anybody.
Ya Pasha.
Akita.